If you own rental property and your CPA has never mentioned a cost segregation study, you have almost certainly left tens of thousands of dollars on the table. Not because you did anything wrong, because depreciation is the only tax strategy most real estate investors ever learn. And depreciation alone is not the full picture. I'm Tom Wheelwright, CPA and best-selling author of Tax-Free Wealth. And today I'm going to show you the layered tax strategy that serious real estate investors use and why stopping at ordinary depreciation is like leaving the engine running and only using first gear. Most real estate investors believe that taking depreciation every year means they are already doing everything right. Where does that belief come from and why is it costing them? Well, let's look at straight line depreciation on residential rental. It spreads the deduction over 27 and a half years. So I'm going to show you an example of this, okay? Let's say you've got this residential rental property. Just so you know, this is Arizona tree. We don't have leaves. Okay. And then, you've got the insides of the building, etc. Your ceiling fan, your window coverings, your flooring, your cabinetry. Okay. So this is your house. You've bought this rental house. You paid $500,000 for it. What most people would do, and most CPAs and enrolled agents and other tax preparers would do, is they would say, look, of that $500,000, we have to allocate some to land. So let's say 20% or $100,000 is land and $400,000 is the building, right? Just land and building, that's all we have. That's all we could have. All right, so the land doesn't wear out, so there's no depreciation on land, and building wears out for rental real estate triggered at 27 and a half years, which is roughly 3.64%, okay? So that means that we've got really roughly only about $15,000 a year in depreciation. That's about what that averages out to. Okay. So if I get $15,000 a year of depreciation, that's great. That's $15,000 of income I'm not paying tax on. And people go, wow, that is terrific. If we're in a 40% tax bracket, that's $6,000 a year in tax savings. Awesome. Only what this shows and what could be done, the difference is massive. It's tens of thousands of dollars the year you buy the property. And potentially, even if you haven't done this, and you've owned the property for a while. So let's talk about the key to maximizing your depreciation deductions. We don't just want depreciation deductions, we want to maximize them. And the key is what we call a cost segregation. And a cost segregation, it's a technical term, which means that we're going to break out the costs of the property into different classes. The Internal Revenue Code, well, actually the regulations to the Internal Revenue Code, the tax law actually has different depreciation rates for different things. It makes sense. Your computer doesn't last 27 and a half years, so why would you depreciate a computer over 27 and a half years? It's much faster. A car doesn't last that long, so it's much faster. Well, what do we see on this diagram that doesn't last this long? Well, first of all, the land improvements, they don't last this long. Now, sometimes they do, but most of the time they don't, okay? We're constantly redoing our landscaping. What about the contents of the building, right? Those things also wear out faster. So here's what a cost segregation does. It takes that $400,000 and it breaks it down between the building, okay? So the building, the land improvements, and the contents. These are shorter life categories. Okay, now generally land improvements are 15 years. So building is 27 and a half years. This is for residential, and contents are 5 to 7 years. Okay, well, wait a minute. If it's 15 years, that's like twice as fast. So I'm going to get twice as much depreciation. Or if it's 7 years, that's like 4 times as fast, right? Okay, so that's the very first thing we want to do is we'd rather be 4 times as fast on our contents if we can. By the way, cost segregation has been in the law. I know some of you are going to cringe and die when you hear this, but it's been in the law since I've been an accountant, and that's over 40 years. Okay, so this is not a new thing. It's just something that you're hearing for the first time, or you've heard a little bit about it, but you don't know exactly what to do with it. On a side note, the tax code was written to reward specific behaviors. Most operators never learn what those are, which is why they spend their careers handing capital to the government, which is why on July 24th in Park City, Utah, we're running a one-day conference walking through exactly how to align your business and investments with what the code already incentivizes. The link to learn more is in the description. I want to break it down, but here's the cool thing. The One Big Beautiful Bill, 2025 bill, took these two and say, look, it's not going to be 15 years or 7 years. It's going to be 1 year, which means 100% depreciation in that year. What does that realistically mean? Typically, we're going to have about 50% of that 400,000 is probably going to end up here. Well, 50% actually of the $500,000. So we're going to end up with building at about $250,000. We're going to end up with land improvements at about $50,000. And we're going to end up with the contents of the building at about $100,000. So there's your $400,000 breakdown of the building portion. Okay. But you can't just do that. You can't just make that allocation. Okay. You have to do a professional cost segregation, which means you're using an engineer and an accountant. The engineer breaks down the cost. The accountant puts them into the right class. Investing is a team sport, as I always say. So anything placed in service after July 19th of 2025 gets this. Before that, we had bonus, but it wasn't 100%. Okay, so what does it cost to a cost segregation? Well, it depends on the property. It could cost anywhere from $3,000 to $20,000. You know, if you've got a massive apartment building, you can imagine it's going to be a little bit more expensive. Smaller property, it's going to be a lot less expensive. But look at the return on investment on that. All right, let's say that you have $150,000 bonus depreciation. Let's say you're in a 33% tax bracket. That is not anywhere near the highest tax bracket. That means that the very first year, you would pay the government $50,000 less in taxes than you otherwise would. So here's the question. Why hasn't my accountant told me that? That is the question you should be asking. Look, what other strategies do we need to be layering on top of this? Because this is the beginning. First, we do the cost segregation. And I can't tell you how many people said, well, cost segregation won't do me any good. So, well, why not? Well, I'm a passive investor. And I'm going, so why doesn't a cost segregation do you any good? Well, because that $150,000 is a passive loss. I'm going, okay, so we have two choices, don't we? He goes, what do you mean? Well, the first choice is, what if I turn that passive loss into an active loss? So a passive loss can only offset passive income. What if I turn the passive loss into an active loss and I could offset any kind of income? Well, that would be cool because then I could offset my W-2 income. I could offset my business income. I could offset any kind of income. That's if I turn it into an active loss. Well, how do you do that? Well, that's called real estate professional. Real estate professional is really simple. All you have to do is you or your spouse have to spend more than 750 hours a year in real estate and more time in real estate than your other jobs. That's a real estate professional. Then somebody will go, yes, but I can't be a real estate professional because I have a full-time job. My spouse has a full-time job. This isn't going to work. I'm saying, okay, so that leads us to option number 2. Let's turn your active income into passive income. Here's the fallacy. I hear accountants say this all the time. I literally called an accountant who was handling a massive development project. I get the K1 from my client who's an investor. So I'm not seeing big depreciation here. Why? How come there's no bonus depreciation? Well, cost segregations don't do any good for our clients. So why not? What do you mean? Well, they're all passive. I'm going, okay, so why doesn't it do them any good? Well, because passive losses aren't deductible. I'm going, that's a false statement. Passive losses are deductible against passive income. So why not create passive income? Well, how do I do that? Well, maybe work less in your business. Maybe have somebody else, like a child, a trust, family member, own part of your business. There's all sorts of ways to turn active income into passive income. So the key is the second thing we have to do after we do the cost segregation. So the first thing we have to do is we actually have to be an investor because rule number 1 is don't lose money, right? That's Warren Buffett's rule number 1, don't lose money. Number 2 is you have to invest in a property that's going to return you a good cash flow. Rule number 3 is we want to use that depreciation as fast as possible. For some people, it may be, well, I can be passive in 2 years. Okay, great. Then let's take this loss now. It will carry over for 2 years. And when you become passive, it will now offset that passive income. So don't think that this is the only thing we can do. Now, when we sell the property, here's another thing I get all the time. Look, Tom, we're going to have recapture. My accountant says it's going to be recapture. We're going to sell the property in 5 years. We're going to recapture anyway. What does it matter? It just doesn't make any difference. I'm going, okay, first of all, as any real estate developer would tell you, having my cash now is way more important than having it a year from now. So the sooner we can get our cash, the better off. Second of all, just because I'm going to sell it doesn't mean I'm going to have recapture. Well, what do you mean? Well, first of all, we can do a 1031 exchange. That means we can sell our property and buy another property because my question always is, so you're going to sell your property. What do you do with the money? This is always the question. I don't know why other people don't ask this question, but I'm always asked the question, what are you going to do with your money? Well, I'm going to invest it in another real estate project. Then I have once in a while, somebody will say, well, you know, I'm going to cash out. I'm getting older. I'm going to cash out. I'm going to put it in a bond. I'm going, what if you put it in a bond that was backed by real estate? How would that be? Well, I would like that. Well, that's called a triple net lease. Okay. Walgreens, Walmart, Safeway, Wendy's, all sorts of companies build a property, sell it to an investor, and lease it back. It's called a triple net lease. So we can do 1031 exchange, but we're going to have all this capital gain. Well, what if we just take that capital gain and reinvest it in an opportunity zone property? Anything invested in an opportunity zone property, we get to defer the tax for 5 years. When we do pay the tax, we only pay 90% of the tax. And if we hold the property for 10 years or more, we pay no tax on the gain from the property that we've invested in. Let me give you one other thing. One of the big questions in the 2025 Act was, how do we get more of our state and local tax deductions? Well, you know, if it's a rental property, you're not limited by the state and local tax deduction, the SALT deduction, the $40,000. You can take all you want because it's a business. It's not a personal property. So let's say that you own 2 or 3 of these properties and you've never done a cost segregation. This is the first time you've heard about it. You go, wait a minute, I need to do a cost segregation. Where do you start tomorrow? The first thing is you need to fire your accountant and you need to find a new accountant who understands and can explain cost segregation and these other strategies. Second of all, you do need to hire a professional cost segregation expert. And third, you need to make sure that your tax advisor is also your tax preparer. But if you really want to go deeper on the investments the government will literally pay you to make, watch the video on the screen here.